not about money. It's about dignity and nobility and inhabiting the truth of who they are. And every gang member, because they happen to be human beings, they all want that. And there aren't any exceptions except the deeply, profoundly mentally ill.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast,
a show where we, Paul Shapiro and Tony Okamoto,
spotlight companies making money by helping solve some of the world's most pressing problems. Who would Jesus hire? That's the question Father Greg Boyle asked himself many decades ago when he became moved by the plight of gang members trapped in a cycle of crime and punishment. Think about it. If you were running a company, would you hire an applicant who'd served time for a violent felony? Well, Father Greg would ask you to consider whether each of us should be defined by the worst thing we've ever done in our lives, or if human beings deserve second chances.
The Jesuit priest, seeing the needless death and suffering caused by gang activity in LA many decades ago, decided in his words that nothing stops a bullet like a job. While some tough-on crime politicians wanted to lock up more and more people, Father Greg wanted to hook them up with employment that could redirect the course of their lives.
So Greg started Homeboy Industries, an organization that would soon become the single largest gang rehabilitation program on Earth, largely focused on job training as well as actually creating new companies that would hire former gang members wanting to re-enter society as productive individuals. Homeboy Industries now runs 9 different companies, employing 500 people, from a bakery to a silkscreen enterprise to a restaurant at LAX, and even one at LA's City Hall where, yes, former gang members now serve elected officials and their staff.
This work with thousands of gang members has led to all types of accolades for Father Greg. He's the subject of the 2012 documentary G-Dog. He's received the California Peace Prize and been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, and he's the author of Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, and is the subject of a biography by Celeste Freeman called G-Dog and the Homeboys.
So sit back and prepare to think. Think about what rehabilitation means, what second chances are about, and what the most effective way to prevent gang violence actually is. And oh yeah, if you listen to the whole interview, you'll get to hear a priest use the F word. Enjoy. Welcome, Father Boyle.
Welcome, Father. Or having read your books and knowing what people call you, should we call you G-Dog?
No. You can call me Greg, like most people do.
So, Father, here on the Business for Good podcast, we usually highlight for-profit companies that are trying to make the world a better place. You're a little different, though, since your group, Homeboy Industries, is actually a charity, but it's a charity that forms for-profit companies that exist to give jobs to gang members. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about your background. How did it come to pass that you felt drawn to lead a life of service in the first place?
Well, I'm a Jesuit priest, so I've been a Jesuit for 47 years and a priest for 35 years. And so I've pretty much began working in community on the margins, very poor parish that just happened to have the highest concentration of gang activity in the world. So, so I just kind of evolved back my way into doing the work that I currently do.
And what was it, Greg, that made you think, back all those decades ago, that I want to devote my life to people who others might see just as violent thugs, as you put it in your books, which we both read and both really liked? You were a pastor at a church, but you decided to leave that life solely to devote yourself to helping gang members find jobs, right?
I don't know if I left any life. I'm still a priest. I still say Mass at Dolores Mission. But, it was a vocation within a vocation. So suddenly, and plus this was the most demonized sector in Los Angeles 30 years ago. There was nobody lower on the rung of the ladder of status than the gang member, most demonized. And so once you discover that demonizing is the opposite of who God is, because it's the opposite of the truth, then it's not difficult to stand with them, because that's the right place to be. So it's never about taking the right stand on issues, but standing in the right place, and that for me was the right place, and that hasn't been altered at all in my life. So Now things have changed. Our approach has changed, and but Homeboy still wants to be what we think the world is invited to become, which is a community of kinship.
How has your approach changed?
Well, I think initially, you listened to gang members and they said, if only we had jobs. So right away we were scurrying to find felony-friendly employers. But, about 15 years in, once you knew gang members, you went, no, it's, everybody needs a way to pay their rent honorably and feed their kids. But it's about healing, because we started to discover we found jobs and even careers for gang members. But because they hadn't experienced any essential foundational healing, the monkey wrench would inevitably get tossed into their life and they would spiral down and return, a relapse, I guess, if you will. They would return to gang activity and end up in prison. So we kind of rethought, oh no, healing has to be the centerpiece. And the relationship is primary, and kind of offering relief and rest to chronic toxic stress. And so all the job stuff is fine, but it's not primary. I mean, in the early days, we had the T-shirt that said, nothing stops a bullet like a job. But everybody wants to go from 0 to 60. Okay, let's just solve this. Okay, job. And we were no different until we discovered that, an employed gang member may or may not go back to prison, and an educated one may or may not go back to prison. But then we landed on this guarantee. A healed gang member will not ever reoffend, period. Won't ever happen. And so then that became, probably in the last 15 years, the heartbeat of the place.
So let me ask you about that, Greg. I want to delve in a little bit deeper into something you had said about it's not being right. It's about standing in the right place. And you're talking about gang members being the lowest rung in society. In your book, Tattoos on the Heart, you talk about what sinner actually means in the Bible, saying it could really be translated as an outcast or someone on the margins of society. Can you talk a little bit about that and why somebody, let's say, who isn't familiar with Jesuit theology, for somebody who isn't familiar, what that means and why you would be drawn to that?
Well, that was kind of the sense in the time of Jesus and before, that screaming at Jesus to pay attention to him. Well, nobody paid attention to him because there wasn't a sense of, hey, give this guy a break. He's blind, It was a sense of he's blind because of his sin or the sin of his parents. So they were the outcasts. And so that's kind of a category. And we have the same thing today. Once anyone allows themselves to be a little more sophisticated about the roots of crime in general and gang activity and violence in particular, then you go, oh, this is about despair, trauma, and mental health. And once you know that, then you're not unsophisticated in your take. It's like in the time of Jesus when he sees a guy who clearly is having an epileptic seizure, and he, like the whole crowd and every person of his time, thinks this guy is possessed by a demon. Well, no, he's got epilepsy. Here's a pill, and that will control your seizures. Well, that's what we know today. But even Jesus, God love him, didn't even know that then. And so it's important not to make that same mistake. So the minute we think it's about, good people and bad people, rest assured you're unsophisticated. There's nothing wrong with that, but you want to move towards something that can get underneath all of this. What's this really about? And this is not to make excuses for bad behavior, but smart people try to explain bad behavior so you can actually do something about it rather than just demonize.
It's one thing to be blind or epileptic. It's another to be a murderer. But a theme of your books is simply showing compassion to everyone, to victims and victimizers alike. to see yourself in them and treat them, friend or foe, with love and respect. Did you ever, or do you even today, have a hard time treating someone with compassion who's committed a particularly heinous act of violence against someone else? And how do you deal with that?
Well, again, I mean, it's all a question of sophistication, how sophisticated one is willing to be, you know. So we're always scratching our heads, you know, like, gosh, why did somebody go into a synagogue and gun down all these people? Oh, hate. It's hate. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, boy, I was going to go with mental illness, but if you want to go with hate, again, it's not very sophisticated. And so we're going to address hate. And I go, yeah, you're going to make more progress if you address mental illness. We belong to each other. There's no such thing as good people or bad people. God doesn't see sin. God sees son. And so, and the hope, of course, is to be able to do the same thing. Demonizing is always untruth. Begin there. So the minute you say, this is a particularly heinous crime done by a particularly awful human being, then you know you've gone down the rabbit hole that won't ever issue in truth. I've been working with gang members for 35 years, and I can't name you somebody who's evil. I can't find somebody who's evil. And you would think I might have wandered across somebody. I've really met people who are so darkly despondent, and I've really met hugely traumatized people who had unspeakable things done to them. And I know really deeply mentally ill people. But I have yet to encounter even once an evil person. And maybe someone might think I might have after 35 years of working with gang members.
So, Greg, I want to shift a little bit now beyond the philosophy of what you're doing, which of course is extremely admirable, and really getting down to the logistics. And so you decided many decades ago that in order to help gang members, you're going to have to give them an alternative to street life. They need more than charity. They needed jobs. And as you said, your motto was nothing stops a bullet like a job. So apart from the money that people make, what is it about jobs that are so important for the people that you're working with?
Well, employment is dignifying. And so every gang member wants a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before and a reason for his mom to be proud of him and a reason for his kids not to be ashamed of him. They all want that. So that the kind of the outsider view would say things like, oh, yeah, well, how are they going to keep them down on the farm after they've made money hand over fist selling drugs? Yeah, go figure. Gang members, if they had a job, it's not about money. It's about dignity and nobility and inhabiting the truth of who they are. And every gang member, because they happen to be human beings, they all want that. And there aren't any exceptions except the deeply, profoundly mentally ill.
So you started by creating Homeboy Bakery, right? Tell us about what it was like to be the founder of a company that sought to hire people other startups wouldn't dream of interviewing, let alone hiring.
Well, part of the thing is that, they're with us for 18 months. And so the hope is that they will, that after 18 months with us, it's kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval. So employers will go, oh, so you spent 18 months at Homeboy. All right, we'll give you a chance, which makes sense because it's not about let me hire people right out of prison. Because, I don't know how wise that is because healing doesn't necessarily happen in prison. I would say 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. So you want, it's a kind of a moment where homies can come to terms and then they gain the resilience that they need. And then the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they're not going to be toppled by it. And then suddenly they're forget the training. Homies can get the training. That's the least part of it. They can learn anything. But if you don't transform your pain, you're just going to keep inflicting it and transmitting it. And so that's the hope of the 18 months, is that there's some essential foundational healing. And then you're employable, But we always want to kind of go quickly to the training. And the outsider view says, gang members and returning citizens, they're not smart enough, their character isn't, deep enough, and they don't know anything. So if we can just give them information and content.
What types of things are you teaching them in that 18 months?
Well, we have 9 social enterprises, and so people learn technical things from baking bread to serving at a restaurant. And so we help them do all those things, and recycling, and we have connections to, we have our solar panel installation training program. We can connect them to whatever training piece, but again, that's always secondary to the healing piece.
Are you ever disappointed when people can't follow through in that 18 months?
No, I never do disappointment. Yeah, I don't believe in it. It's otherwise, if I'm disappointed, then it's about me. It's not about that person. Because, oh my God, then it becomes a tally sheet. How many people have you saved, rescued, fixed? And this is the long haul. And we're kind of reverse cherry pickers. We don't work with the person most likely to succeed, but the belligerent and the violent offending gang member. So, like any rehab, I think if I ran a drug rehab, and if I was disappointed that people relapsed, I don't think I'd be very good at my job. Because the longer view is, relapse happens, and everybody got a dose of this. It happens all the time at Homeboy, but the folks the homies who run the place now, it took them three tries at Homeboy before it locked in, and so I've just come to know that that's how it works.
So, Greg, I want to ask you. Homeboy Bakery was the first of the for-profit companies that Homeboy Industries, the nonprofit, started. And my understanding is that Homeboy Bakery became so successful that it enabled you to open other Homeboy companies, right? So tell us just briefly, if you don't mind, what are some of the other businesses under the Homeboy umbrella? You mentioned there were 9 of these enterprises. What are they?
Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen. We have Homeboy Diner, City Hall, the only place you can get food in City Hall. We have a restaurant at LAX Terminal 4, American Airlines terminal. We have farmers markets. We have recycling, electronic recycling. We have merchandise, our merchandise store and line of products. We have a thing called Homeboy Grocery, where we sell, chips also in guacamole, and all the Ralph's supermarkets from middle of the state to San Diego, and some Gelson's, and also all the Stop and Shops on the East Coast. And then, did I mention the bakery? Anyway, there's supposed to be 9 somewhere in there.
And how many people are employed by these 9 companies?
We have about 500 employees altogether, so 80 senior staff or whatever, 80 what we call core, and then full-time and part-time trainees.
So how does Homeboy Industries interact with various for-profit companies? Does it oversee them? Are they independent? They do receive funding from the charity. What's the general structure?
Well, we're a $20 million annual operation. Half of that comes from our 9 enterprises, and the other half we have to raise. So, sometimes we're the victims of our own success. People go, oh, they don't need money. They have 9 businesses. But we're huge. We're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet Earth. So no place anywhere in the world has more gang members walking through its doors wanting to redirect their lives. So, it's a daunting thing, and obviously we need to subsidize. So if we were just running businesses, we'd have, I don't know, 5 or something in the cafe instead of 35. And so, people always do that too, run it like a business. I go, why? Why would I want to do that?
Are some of these companies profitable on their own, or do they all require like subsidization from Homeboy Industries?
Yeah, I mean, probably the one that is run like a business in as much as it doesn't have a lot more trainees is the Silkscreen. And so, it's $1 million. They contribute $1 million to our coffers every year or thereabouts. And you go, yeah, that's because it mainly runs like a business.
So who funds the charity? Is it individual donors? Is it foundations? Do you get government grants? Like who's providing that other $9 million, or excuse me, the other half of that money?
Yeah, all of the above, except, we've been as high as 25% government, and now we're at 1%.
What led to that?
I don't use the word sinful very often, but I might right now, because it's sinful that the government doesn't fund, because its impact in the county alone is so singular that you go, whoa, what are you doing? How are you not trying to figure out a way to? So it's all these, you're always doing battle with the political winds, and a new mayor gets in or whoever, and they all want to reinvent the wheel. And I was the one who started this program that, ended gang violence. Everybody wants that. And it's frustrating because here we are plodding along 31 years and you just go, oh, come on, But so what happens is you have, so we had a labor grant and a city grant and a county grant that just ended in the end of September. It wasn't like we had done something wrong. It's just that was the end. So now we have to scramble to figure out how else can, So it's too bad. I mean, if any of those entities were smart, they'd go, oh, wait a minute, let's try to figure out how to give money to. If the County of Los Angeles, just through the probation department, just gave us $5 million a year, would that be commensurate with the services we provide to the County of Los Angeles? No, but we'll take it,
I'd imagine it's a lot cheaper and, of course, more humane to run a program like Homeboy Industries rather than locking people up. But have you ever seen any studies about the fiscal comparison between what we normally do, which is incarcerate people, versus what you do by giving them an alternative to crime?
Well, I mean, I think those studies abound. Why that doesn't move people is a head scratcher to me, but I just know that it doesn't. You can say this all the time. Look how much money we're spending on prisons, and the fact that a single prisoner in the state of California, you spend more on him than you do a year of tuition at Harvard. So, but that's been true forever. So that doesn't ever seem to be an argument that moves people too greatly.
So, Greg, of course, the 9 companies that you are running are providing jobs now for many hundreds of people at a time. What does the charity do in addition to that? I know that the charity Homeboy Industries provides jobs, right? Like mental health counseling and tattoo removal, right?
Yeah, as an organization, there's the program side, which is the 18-month training program, therapy, tattoo removal, curriculum, some 60, if you will, self-help classes and that kind of thing. We have a kind of an educational component. We have a school for junior high and a high school, case management, navigators. So we have all that part.
I remember in the book you mentioned that there was one gentleman with whom you were working who had a pretty bold forehead tattoo. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, again, part of the evolution is to listen and you respond. So you don't think things up. You just go, here's a good idea. So a guy comes in with "fuck the world" tattooed on his forehead and he's saying, I'm having a hard time finding a job. you go, well, maybe we can put our heads together on this one. And so you try to find a doctor with a laser machine. That's sort of how that began. And then once I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted to get their tattoos removed, we knew we needed to do something. So we have a designated clinic that's packed Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, one paid physician assistant and 45 volunteer doctors who get trained there. We have 3 laser machines, and nobody removes more tattoos than we do.
And I presume that this gentleman's face no longer says "fuck the world."
No, he's a security guard at a movie studio, and there's no trace of the dumbest thing he'd ever done.
Very good. Very good. So, Greg, not all of your startups have succeeded, right? For example, you talk about how Homeboy Plumbing went, down the tubes. Sorry. What do you think made it unsuccessful? And in general, what do you think it takes to make one of your companies a success?
Well, it's always a crapshoot, and you're always trying to find that one singular business thing that suddenly or a product that becomes Paul Newman's own or something, And so that hasn't exactly found us yet. So I don't know. I mean, it's you just try things. People come with ideas. People always want us to open restaurants here, there, and restaurants are hard. Food is hard, but everybody wants to do food.
Why does everybody want to do food?
I don't know. It's the sexy thing. Bread is sexy. People want to do all that stuff.
Bread is sexy.
Yeah, I mean, because they go, wow, it's bread. It's and gang members, enemies baking bread together. I mean, I get it. But, you also have to deal with health department and quality control, and it's harder, You'd love to if you found the widget that you could manufacture and that would sustain all your other expenses. Boy, that's what we're looking for. I always tell people silkscreen is a good one because, you don't have to worry about the health department. And everybody needs a t-shirt, so it's kind of recession proof. No matter how bad the economy gets, everybody wants the t-shirt to commemorate their family reunion or whatever.
Sometimes the people you affect aren't even employed by one of your companies, right? One story that particularly struck me in your book was of Anthony, who knew nothing about cars but wanted to become a mechanic. Can you tell us about what happened with Anthony?
Yeah, well, those were in the days when before we had businesses. So that's how old that story is. And it was just trying to get my mechanic because he wanted to be a mechanic. So my mechanic taught him everything he knows. And so he became a mechanic. And so that's what we did in the early days. We tried to match felony friendly. I'd give talks all over the place, and employers would go, how can I help? I go, well, hire this guy. I'm not asking you to transform your whole workforce into gang members. Hire one guy. Who would Jesus hire? He'd hire that guy. So you try to get him to think in a more spacious way. And it worked. That's what we did in the early days, which was just dispatching gang members to, felony-friendly people.
I saw on your website that you still have a hire a homeboy section. Is that something that you still do?
Well, because they finish their 18 months, and then they have to go somewhere. So, sometimes they go to further training. But often enough, they, we just find somebody. So we have the employment development side, the workforce readiness side, where they move from our 18 months to employment outside.
Greg, have you ever had a situation out of all the thousands of people with whom you've worked where somebody was, let's say, violent in the workplace, or something happened where it was really regrettable and set the program back?
Not really. I mean, that's sort of the part of, all that stuff's going to get worked out here at Homeboy. So that's kind of the point of the place and that's the good housekeeping seal of approval that, okay, we're sending you this guy who's resilient and knows who he is. And that's valuable. So it's not just feel good about hiring returning citizens. It's this guy's a healed person. And so then people understandably can feel good about it. So,
what percentage of people who go through Homeboy Industries become, in your words, healed and able to go out and work in the workforce?
Well, it's like AA or NA or any 12-step program, 100%. Does it work? It works if you work it. So anybody who surrenders to it, it always works. If there isn't an incident, I can't think of a single moment where it didn't. But that's kind of how this works. If you surrender to this, it will work. If you don't, then you'll come back. If you test dirty, which we always test people, or if you disappear, or if you reoffend, you'll be back because you got a dose of something that's quite compelling, and that's what we always hope will happen.
So in order to get a job at one of your companies, they must complete the entire 18-month program?
No, the companies are part of the program. There are some core people who are bakers because you can't just keep turning over the bakers. So that's part of the phases that they go through. And at one phase they're doing clerical, and another phase they're working at the silkscreen or at the recycling or at the bakery. So it's all they're all kind of getting a taste of all these things. But the jobs after the 18 months are outside of Homeboy.
So, I see. So after the 18 months, then they are designed to move on out from Homeboy to get jobs elsewhere. That these aren't careers necessarily for most of these folks.
No, I mean, not in our businesses.
Greg, I want to ask you something about a personal interest of mine. In Tattoos of the Heart, you talk about the Berrigan brothers, Phil and Dan. And for those who don't know, they're primarily known for being anti-war Jesuit priests and became quite influential thinkers and writers in their own right. A friend of mine, Bruce Friedrich, was actually incarcerated with Phil Berrigan after the two of them were protesting against nuclear fighter jets many years ago. And Bruce told me that Phil Berrigan, during the time that they were in prison together, decided to become a vegetarian in order to widen his own circle of compassion and adopt a more nonviolent relationship with God's creatures. I know that some prominent Christian thinkers like Leo Tolstoy or others, including people like Cesar Chavez, were vegetarians to try to realize the kingdom of heaven here on earth. Have you personally ever given any thought, either theologically or personally, to the question of nonviolence toward animals?
Well, I was a vegetarian many years ago when I was studying philosophy in Gonzaga, but it's a good point, but not too much, no.
Editorial note. I really wanted to follow up with Father Greg on this point because his answer was pretty brief and I wanted to delve more into the topic with him. But sadly, he was running very short on time, and so we didn't get to go into it more.
Father, you've worked with the more than 12,000 gang members and ex-gang members. I imagine many people listening to this show have probably spoken to 0 gang members in their lives. If you could tell them one thing about the people you spend your life with, what would it be?
Human beings are involved. There are no demons. We belong to each other. And once people know that as the truth, then they will work towards kinship. And that's the whole goal. No kinship, no peace, no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no equality. So all the things that we really want, like peace, justice, and equality, are really byproducts of our own efforts at kinship. So it's a question of focus.
Just further to that point, Greg, if there are people who are running companies listening to this show right now, maybe they have policies against hiring criminals or against hiring felons, for example, or maybe they wouldn't even interview somebody if they happen to have a gang tattoo. What advice would you have for them?
I think you're missing out on eternally interesting human beings who are hard workers. But I don't know, is that the world we want? I don't want to be in a world like that, everybody's a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done, including the employers who are refusing to give a chance. So, it's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family, that we ought not to be reduced to the worst things we ever did. And once you have a more sophisticated take on how does these things happen, how does crime happen, who's in prison, once you're more sophisticated about that, then you have more room for compassion.
Do you have any resources you'd recommend, say, to somebody who wants to hire a homeboy or an ex-gang member or someone with tattoos?
I don't know about resources that, if they're in Los Angeles, then they certainly could come to us. We are a resource for that, where we could be helpful and in placing people and placing the right person.
Sure. And so finally, Greg, on the show, we always ask our guests one thing, or maybe many things if you'd like, for which they are grateful in the world. So finally, for the show, Father Greg Boyle, what are you grateful for in this world?
I'm grateful for the many, many thousands of gang members I've been privileged to know. The day will never come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than they are. They've reached me and changed me and have led me to what true kinship is all about.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to leave it. Thank you so much, Father Greg Boyle.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you all.
All right, folks. Thanks so much for listening to the show.
We hope you got a lot out of it and that you will show us some love. You can rate Business for Good as 5 stars on iTunes, support us on Patreon, and tell your friends interested in business, or really just in making the world a better place, about the show.
And we'd love to hear what you're thinking. Please feel free to contact us anytime via our website, businessforgoodpodcast.com.
And as always, we hope that you will be in the business of doing good.